Hi, and welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube and you want to learn a little bit more about what we do here, you can visit officehours.global. And typically, our first hour is general questions around media and virtual production. Our second hour is something that we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we'll be talking about client management because clients are the lifeline of our business. Tomorrow, Carl Asmussen will be talking to us more about synthesizers. And to learn more about the rest of the week and what we have going on, again, visit officehours.global. And let's get this show started. Go ahead, Bill.
Guy Cochran has our first question this morning out of Seattle, Washington. And Guy says, what is the best or handiest non-tech thing you've learned while on a production?
Jason?
Very simply, that there's no substitute for a good night's sleep.
That's a really good one. Courtney?
When to keep your mouth shut. I learned another important thing is never discuss the product in front of the client. And if you're doing a commercial, and always use respect the chain of command. This goes for working in the Army and working in production. Go through the assistant director. He's your pathway to all the other members of the crew. And try not to directly address anyone above your chain of command.
That's a good one. You can easily get a not so nice reputation of someone that is not easy to work with. David?
Yep. Humility in knowing that sometimes your way isn't the only way to do things, and being able to adapt and adopt to other ways of getting the job done.
Bill?
Sets are primarily composed of two things: a bunch of things that you have to use, which are very important, and a bunch of people that you have to deal with who are much more important. For me, one of the keys to learning how to be effective on a set was to understand that the things can take your focus away from the people, and that's dangerous and sometimes deadly.
Blue?
I'm going to answer this from a live event perspective. Typically, our clients don't really know the question they're asking, right? So they just ask a question, and we as production team or event team are constantly trying to think of how can we say yes to that answer or to that question. And generally speaking, before saying yes to the question, you want to try and understand what the outcome is before you actually say yes. Like, when they ask that question, whatever that question is, be like, okay, what is it that you're actually trying to accomplish? What's your outcome? Why do you want to do this? And then by understanding the why, you can understand how to properly serve your client.
And Mitchell?
Yeah, Courtney took two of my favorites, keep your mouth shut and understand the chain of command. I'll add one more, and it's directed at our younger group here. Dress appropriately. Do not wear cutoffs. Don't wear jeans, some T-shirts. If you got a political statement or some funny, snarky comment, keep it to yourself and on your T-shirt.
Yeah, that's easy to, especially if you're just starting out, it's always better for you to dress up than dress down so that you can learn the culture of the set that you're working on. And I'll just add, basically what a lot has been said is really around the people part of things. So apart from actually the production, the shoot, but how you treat people, it goes such a long way. Next question.
Next one comes from John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. And he says, which sonnet enclosure does the panel recommend for the Blackmagic Decklink Duo 2? Excuse me.
Go ahead, Jason.
My favorite sonnet enclosure is not a sonnet enclosure because I believe it's cheaper, but the OWC Helios 3S adds a couple of things that I really like. It's got Thunderbolt through. It'll provide 85 watts of charging power, and you get a display link output just directly and for free. So I think those are great. I've got a pair of the Duo 2s, and they work like a charm with that rig.
Next question.
Simon Ray in Shrewsbury in the UK says, has anyone performed tests to compare the latency introduced by using display link protocol devices like a pair of pluggables over that of a Decklink setup? Is the cost difference justifiable in community projects?
Jeffrey?
So I've been, I use the pluggables when I'm putting together shows and Zoom calls. So I do it in two different ways. One's actually will go into my ATEM Mini for ISO record, and one time it'll actually go in, so it can come into another computer, so I can bring it in from there. I have yet to see any type of real latency, maybe 5 to 10 milliseconds, as long as you got you're all plugged in, your cabling right, and you got decent cables. I don't think there's too much of a latency.
All right, next question.
Brian Brecker in Charlottesville, Virginia says, what's the best method for managing the names of lots of NDI sources to more easily pull them into vMix with the fewest mouse clicks possible?
David?
I'm no expert on this, but I think that's what the NDI Access Manager is all about, where you can map IP to friendly name, and you have the ability to change that friendly name. But hopefully somebody else with a little more experience can chime in and correct me if I'm wrong.
We've got Jeffrey next.
No, you don't need to be corrected. You are absolutely right on how that works. And of course, naming system, I always name cameras as cam 1, cam 2, and then I name sources. I don't try to put numbers on cameras because my cameras change. I mean, besides this camera right here, this is probably the one camera that's the constant. But as I put in more cameras and take out more other sources, then I got to name them. So having labels on the cameras kind of defeats that purpose.
Next question.
Andre Dalla in Berlin is up next. Did anyone experience pitching audio issues in Zoom? Last week and today as well, we had a few meetings with some participants' audio being pitched very high or low. It appeared in the browser and the app more on Mac than PC. Any ideas what could have caused that?
Let's see what Courtney has to say.
Sounds like a disagreement on sample rate for your audio. So I'm not sure. Maybe one of our other Zoom aficionados here can tell us what Zoom prefers, whether it's 48K or 44.1. But if you're not at one of those two sample rates, it could cause confusion of the playout hardware to try and keep the audio synchronized with the video. And if your computer sample rate is not set to the same sample rate that Zoom is delivering, you could hear it pitch up or pitch down as it changes the sample rate to try and put things back in sync.
Mitchell?
I kind of agree with Courtney there. I think if you do have a sample rate problem, or if you have some kind of a sync issue, Zoom may be trying to catch up. In other words, the audio is playing, it's playing out of sync, and it speeds up to catch up to, or slows down, depending on what the circumstances are. I haven't heard it before. I'm running Mac M1 Mini with silicone, 12.3.1 version, and the latest Zoom. So I think it's a rare case. Might have something to do with your setup and your system.
Rupert?
If the problems were just recently, I looked back on the Zoom status messages just recently. There were some reports of audio problems, but it seemed to be related to people dialing in. You know, if you have participants dialing in over the phone bridge phone number for their audio. So if you happen to be in a meeting where that may have been the case, that may have been having some impact on the audio in those meetings.
Next question.
David Brady, New York City, up next. And here on the panel, what are some of the basic metrics available from social media platforms like Facebook and YouTube? And what kind of information is most applicable to report upon?
John?
For many years, I owned a company called SEO Social Media Marketing, and we did this work. And the coolest tool that I've ever seen was called Radian 6, and now it's owned by Salesforce, and they changed the name to Social Studio. And this tool was absolutely amazing. As a company, you would build your tag cloud, and it would go out to all the social media marketing or the social sites, and it would tell you it would tell you if negative chatter was going on or positive chatter was going on, and then it would rank the people that were talking about your brand. It's an amazing, amazing tool.
And I'll go next with you. So basically, you were asking what's most applicable. This is where it's a Mickey response. It depends. What are you looking for? What are you tracking? Some of the basic things of whether from a video perspective of time view, the shares, the comments, but you can even dig even deeper to be able, like if you look through even something as simple as like your Twitter analytics, and it will show you where those most shares come from. It'll show you even location based. So when we're building out reports, we're looking at, Blue kind of mentioned earlier about like, what does the client actually need? And we work reverse engineer that. So what are they looking to track? And then we track that and be able to build a report around that. There's also, I might have to come back and put in the chat, just from aggregating, like part of social media is listening. So while the data can give you direct information, there's a lot where, from a human perspective, of making inferences of why is this post more popular than this post, and seeing where that's when you get into A/B testing. So just from a basic perspective, and then needing to do a little bit more research on top of that. Jeffrey?
For YouTube, if YouTube and Facebook, they're going to be totally separate on trying to get your numbers, because they work totally different. And with YouTube, the two things that I look at are views and retention, because that's where you're going to start seeing if people stick around to your videos. And with the introduction of chapter markers, that changes that retention a little bit more, because now people have a choice of where they want to start onto your video. So if you're doing a how-to video on fixing a car and they just want to know where all the bolts are to take out a certain part or something like that, then they can skip to that part. Then they follow from there, and then they'll go from there. So if there's like a beginning of a video that's like the first 2 minutes are just you talking and saying, hey, subscribe to my channel and things like that, they can skip right over that. And but it's more important to actually get to your meat and potatoes of any video at the beginning, especially because YouTube's going to make some changes. You're already seeing some changes in some of the videos. Like, for instance, if you hover over them, you'll see the first 30 seconds, and people are going to watch that to see if that's where they really want to go with your video. So retention is the biggest one for me, followed by how many views, because you can fake views, unfortunately. And then, especially if you're trying to do something in the long run with monetization.
Next question.
Next one comes from TJ Asher in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He says, I have Beats 3 studio noise canceling headphones and Linsol KZ ZSX in-ears, which seal really well thanks to Comply Foam. Of these two, which does the panel recommend for using on my plane flight, and why?
Jason?
It all comes down to active versus passive noise canceling. And on the Beats, I've never liked the noise canceling. It just does not seem to work very well. So I'm going to go with the latter.
Nigel?
Yeah, I think it's all about the proximity to the child that is screaming, and how close they are. Because if they're very close, then there is no level of noise reduction that will work. I tend to go over the ears for long flights, and then for shorter flights, I don't mind something in my ears.
Courtney?
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said, but the active noise cancellation colors the audio much more than any other type of headphone. So if you want to listen for accuracy, you may be missing a lot of high ends or hear comb filtering or strange things going on if you're listening to music. If you're listening to spoken word or podcast or something, it's probably fine using the Beats. I would use the in-ear Linsols for that reason if you're wanting to listen intently to music or be entertained by something that you enjoy listening to. And remember, with the Beats, if you listen loud, you can annoy your neighbors.
Mitchell?
Yeah, I agree with everybody saying active noise reduction, the ones that have the microphone that samples the surrounding sound and I guess phases it out or removes it. Mainly, when I'm wearing them, I'm wearing the Bose Quiet Comforts, and I do it just to cut the engine drone down. It's not so much for listening to music or listening to a soundtrack on a movie. I like that. The earphones that provide a seal, my ears are very sensitive to pressure changes, and that just seems to mess those up just a wee bit too much.
David?
I'm with Mitch there. As a diver, the adjustment of pressure on the eardrum is critical, and the foam things I can't deal with for the most part.
And Bill?
And I just wanted to note, if you go with in-ear, be very careful about your overall levels. Thankfully, most of the iDevices and other things now have limits you can put on the amount. I find when I fly, because there's so much background noise, I tend to turn things up too much, and I've left that setting for a while and gotten into an airport when I'm out of the plane, and I've been surprised at how loudly I'm listening, and that really annoys me because your hearing has a lifespan, and the more you listen really loudly, the worse it's going to get as you age. So be very careful about that.
Next question.
Next one comes from Tony Mobley in Newnan, Georgia. What is the process for doing a press release for your events?
We'll start with you, Bill.
Well, there have been decades of traditions as to how press releases look. I think we've got an example of one that Dennis has that he's able to toss into the meeting here. It has some specific things. The goal of a press release is to get attention to your event. So some sort of marketing stuff, particularly the contact block you can see in the upper left-hand corner of that, make sure that whoever you're sending it to knows who to contact for more information if they want to schedule an interview or something like that. That's critical. A centered bowl headline. It's written in the inverted pyramid style, which means that most of the juicy information is as close to the top as possible. And then you go into more detail as you go down. Links and things like that are common now. That little blurb of text in the bottom is an old tradition that they don't do much anymore. But in the old days, all the press releases had a -30, which means this is the end. And you tried your hardest to keep everything's on a single page. There are multi-page press releases and there are forms that do that kind of thing, but generally you're looking to make it as easy as possible for somebody to contact you, because the goal of a press release isn't the last stage, it's the first stage in forming a relationship or getting more in-kind earned media. So just be direct, write clearly, and let them know what you do and hope you get responses.
John?
A-Town, PR Newswire has been the 800-pound gorilla in the space for 70 years. Their services start at about 300 and go to several thousand, depending on what you want to do. We did one for the rocket launch. Ineffective for online promotion, my opinion.
Mitchell?
Yeah, I agree 100% with John and Bill before that. One page, keep it simple. Think in terms of what is the most salient points that person, the person at the TV station or the radio station or whatever, would be most interested in, and don't try to distribute it yourself. There's just so many outlets. PR Newswire has all of the local or regional or national locations where you need to go. Use the professionals.
Yeah, that's a great point. Press releases have changed a lot in the time of, I want to say probably 20 years ago, I was writing them for one of my mentors, Fitzroy Gordon. And that was the perfect example that Bill showed, the template outline, making sure essentially it's a who, what, where, when, why. If we talk about where we are right now, and especially if you are doing it as an independent person, you almost want to write your press release as a story, because outlets, publications, online, what they're looking for, if this is not, breaking news, that it could be content that, think of it as a way that this could be content that they're going to be able to use to serve their audience. So while we spoke about the technical side of it, there's also make sure you're reaching the right publications or the right outlets, because if you have a political event and you're sharing it, we're trying to go to a fashion house, it's not likely that they're going to pick it up. So really do that research on who you're sending the release out to, and then build the relationships before you need them. Because if you send them valuable information that's not a part of your press release, when the time comes that you do, PR, public relations, is all about building relationships. So that's just a unspoken part of it. David?
And if you're writing it yourself, channel your inner Bob Dole and do it in the third person.
Ooh, good one. Yes. Nigel?
Yeah, you said something I think is worth picking up on. If you're sending out a press release through one of the agency wires, like John suggested, assume nobody will read it or care. If somebody needs to really read it and care, then you need to really consider using an agency, a PR agency, because while they may feel like an unnecessary expense, what they have is journalists and production houses and TVs on companies on their speed dial or on their email, and they can drive a story for you. So if you send one through the press wires on your own, it's really almost worthless. You got to find someone who knows somebody, and then they'll get you where you need to go.
And Bill?
I agree with everything that was just said. I will say that if you have some kind of branding that you're proud of, like if you're Tony, you have your logo for your show and things like that, the first 30 press releases you send out will probably get no direct response. But if the people who these come before start seeing you over and over again consistently, it does start to build a little brand inside the press and public relations executives, and they at least know you're doing this. And over time, I mean, all marketing, and this is really marketing at one thing, all marketing is about reach and frequency. It's how often, how many people you get to and how often you get in front of them. Typically, you don't buy a product the first few times, maybe even the first dozen or the first 100 times you're in front of somebody. But with repetition over time, you build some credibility. And then when the magic happens and you have something that they want to hear, they think of you before they think of somebody else. And that's kind of how it works.
I'll just add one more, especially in this day and age, keywords, keywords, keywords. So just making sure you've got words that will attract not only the publication, but then also your audience. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Tony Mobley in Noonan. How many panelists are using Filmic Pro for videography or photos?
Well, right now, it looks like Bill is going to answer that.
Yeah, so I've had a series of 4 shoots over the course of the past few weeks, and I am slowly but surely trying to wean myself off of bigger cameras and shoot these events on my phone. So I am bouncing back and forth between the internal, on my iPhone 12 Plus, the internal camera and Filmic Pro. And I have found pluses and minuses for both. Each one does a few things that the other doesn't do as well, particularly when you're starting to mount them on rigs. I'm using a DJI Osmo 4, I believe. I'm getting some really exceptional results by virtue of the computational video and photography that they're building into these phones. It's amazing. But I'm telling you, I'm starting to get to the point where I'm starting to say that would be a better set of shots to do with Filmic, and that would be a better set of shots to do with the iPhone. You can get good results out of both of them, but the iPhone's automated controls using its internal stuff are getting me more quicker shots better than the Filmic, but Filmic gives me more control when I want to set up a shot and really execute it with more precision. So it's the balance between more automation versus more control for me, and I'm trying to learn both. Talk to me after I've done 30 or 40 of these gigs, and I'll probably know a lot more, but those are my initial impressions on it.
Next question.
Next one comes from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. Adding reverb control to conference rooms. Best order of operations. Treat walls first, ceiling, suggestions for affordable sound analyzers, and thanks.
Courtney.
I'd say put carpet on the floor, because a lot of most conference rooms have a large table in them, and a lot of people don't realize that that trapped space between the table and the floor, if there's not a carpet on the floor, can cause a great echo path for sounds to get trapped back and forth into a standing wave underneath there. And then next is ceiling, because that doesn't interfere with your shot the most, and floor. So ceiling and floor first, and then any parallel walls, break up at least one of them. So put curtains on a wall or pictures, or use something to break up a wall if you can. At least one of any 2 parallel walls.
Bill?
All good advice. The most important piece of equipment you can take into the room is your ears. Learn how to listen to what a room sounds like in its natural state, whatever that is, and then understand it's going to change everything you put in. So an empty room is going to sound usually very hollow just to begin with, and you might think it's going to be a terrible circumstance, but you get furniture, you get desks, you get other breakup things, and the sound profile is going to change. After that, the things that surprised me, knowing a little bit about billiards or pool, I found helped me, because I got to the point where I understood that wherever the microphone is and wherever the speakers are, if there's more than one, you are putting sound sources out and it's bouncing off everything and getting to that microphone. Sometimes I can look at a room and say, that's forming an equilateral triangle. That mic position, if I put it there, is going to get all sorts of reinforced problems, maybe comb filtering, or the walls are just, I got parallel walls that are really hard. That could set up a standing wave. I should probably think about doing something to knock those down. So understanding a little bit of the philosophy of how sound works can help you in the beginning, but you got to listen and then treat, and then listen and then treat, and get to the point you're happy with.
Mitchell?
Yeah, most architects design conference room for beauty. They want them to look cool, and they want a glass wall on one side, and they want to have drywall for a ceiling. The best place to get the sound problems dealt with is at the architectural level, so that when a room is built out, it's not a square room. It doesn't fancy a big glass wall, and if it does, there's a nice heavy curtain you can pull through. I kind of feel like that when I walk into somebody else's conference room that's already been done, the walls generally are the best place to go soak up sound. And as Bill suggests, your ears are the best analyzer you have, and clapping your hands and listening to hear what the sound does.
David?
Yeah, the inevitable fishbowl conference room is a challenge, especially as everybody's returning to office, and now you got to try to retrofit things in that appeal to the design at hand. It's going to be a tricky thing. Try to turn things off axis would be the best suggestion I would have, so it's not in a big box.
And Jeffrey?
First thing to do is to talk to your building manager, because keep in mind, building out a conference room is not just, I can hang this here, I can hang that there. There actually are some ordinances in certain states and countries that say, hey, you cannot put up more than this onto a wall. And you definitely can't put things onto the ceiling, because if they fall down, they hit somebody's head, then all of a sudden you're talking about lawsuits and things like that. So you want to do it right. And so that means going to the building manager first and seeing what you can do to make that happen.
And Courtney?
Well, be careful if you're architecting a building about water pipe placement, because strangely enough, water pipes can carry sounds and echo and cause wonderful, strange echo pings and things like that. I've been in rooms that have had major water feeds running through the walls, or in the worst case, there was a building in San Antonio called the Taj Mahal, and it had a 300,000 gallon water tank on the third floor, and had a room underneath that with a polished granite floor on it. And you get in the middle of that room and clap your hands, and the echo would last for about 20 seconds, because it would go up through that all those gallons of water and echo back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back down. It was kind of like an acoustical version of a laser. And it was tremendously awful. And from then on, I've gone into rooms and clapped my hands, and I can tell where the water pipes are by the sound that I'm hearing coming back from the walls.
That's so neat. Next question.
John Frailer, it looks like Failer, in Greensfield, Massachusetts, says about to start renovating an old elementary school to convert into a business incubator. How useful is the old Cat5 wiring and switches, and what would you recommend the minimum new wiring and switches to be?
Jason?
Ooh, great questions. This is a pretty handy book, the AV Cable Installer's Pocket Guide. And what you'll find from it is that Cat5, Cat5e, and Cat6 have, let's see here, exactly the same capacitance, exactly the same impedance, exactly the same gauge. But that doesn't mean anything by itself. As far as spec is concerned, it depends on how far your Cat5 is going to be run and how old it is. So be careful about that and just test it. Push some data down the lines and see what it's doing or not doing for you. As far as switches are concerned, I don't know. I like ubiquities.
Mitchell?
Yeah, do yourself a favor and tear all the old wiring and switches out, because you do not know what you're inheriting. The Cat5, the word itself, and old scare me to death. So if you're building a business incubator and you're going to require consistent and quality service, just do it over again.
Rupert?
Yeah, exactly. If you're doing a whole load of other refurbishment work and you've got people and contractors and equipment on site, it should be just a no-brainer to pull that cabling out and just put new stuff, and plenty of new stuff. You've got the opportunity now to put it in, so I'd take that opportunity and just remember all the locations. Try and get everybody, get enough capacity in there to get anybody who's in there wired Ethernet to their desk, preferably. Make sure you get extra allowances in there for access points if you're going to put those in too, and cameras. Or just take the opportunity now to get as much in there as you can.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, I would do the exact same thing. I'd rip everything out, especially if it's Cat5, not Cat5e. You definitely want to take that out. I would go more towards a Cat7, type cabling, and then even think about how you could do some fiber drops if you need to go from expand from your current situation. Like for instance, if you decide that you have a really big building and you're going to have a server room on one corner of the building, but then you've got to stretch it out to the other side, you can have a fiber drop on the other side to alleviate on some of the computers over there. So depending on that, that's where I would go, is just take it all out and start from scratch.
Phil.
I don't know if you got the old wiring diagram, but if you do, I would say Cat5 makes an excellent fish tape. So just you can attach your new cables to the old ones and pull it through, and it's a lot easier than having to run those steel fish tapes through walls.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. Houses of Worship put up first live stream on YouTube yesterday, his house of worship. Are there suggestions for going forward? Just a sermon and a prayer.
Tony.
So over the last several months, we've been primarily just doing private streams, and unfortunately for us, we've had copyrighted music as a part of it, and so we have not gotten any strikes, but we have gotten a lot of not strikes, but claims, maybe. And so we made the decision that we would no longer try to put music up, but just a sermon and a prayer. And so it's sitting up there, yesterday's first effort. It had been there for some time, that we were coming with a live service. And I don't know if it's a matter of the fact that it's taking so long for us to actually put something live there, but it's completely dead. I know that there are some things that we need to do in terms of, maybe putting some type of title or cover that gives information about the church and that kind of thing. I intentionally did not try to do anything myself because I wanted to get feedback from the community before I did that. I know that there are things that can be done. I know that there are things that definitely need to be addressed, but I wanted to get feedback from the community before I made an effort to do the things that I know that I can do to tweak it.
So you're referring to overall the marketing or getting the word out about the ministry, and not specifically the sound strikes, or both, just to be clear.
Well, there should not be any more strikes because there is no copyrighted music. It is just a sermon and a prayer. And incidentally, next week, it'll be my sermon that'll be there. And I just want to try to generate some engagement. And that's the whole purpose for us doing it, in terms of having some engagement, interaction. And we're not expecting for 100,000 people to come and watch, the church's YouTube, but we do want to have some interaction and some engagement. And one of the things that I'm going to do is make sure that all of the members of the community, the church community, have at least gone and subscribed to the website. Yeah. YouTube. And so that's going to be the first path. But I really wanted to get some engagement, some ideas from the panelists.
Jeffrey.
Well, first of all, for music, there's a lot of music that you can do that's non-copyright because it's past its date. It doesn't have a specific person that's alive anymore. And then, of course, if you bring in somebody and actually do like a guitar singing or whatever, even a full band that plays those songs, you're not going to get any type of strike or monetization change, because you are a church and you don't want somebody monetizing on your sermons, because that doesn't make sense. So the other thing is, if you're a church and you are registered as a church, make sure that YouTube knows that this is a church channel and that you are registered as a church, so nonprofit status and all that. So they don't do anything like try and make money off of that. But the other thing is about consistency, and that's the one thing that churches do, is they're consistent. They have a sermon every single Sunday. So if you set up live streams and you say, this is when it's going to happen on Sunday, and even try and think about doing more than one sermon a week, even if it's like one at 7 a.m., one at 10 a.m., and do it live rather than pre-recorded, because a lot of people will enjoy the live rather than the pre-recorded stuff. And then as Alex has talked about before, just completely turn off any type of chat or anything like that, because the devils do come out, and especially if you're talking about something in either a political or a religious fashion, you get a lot of people that come out and try to test the system.
David?
The other thing I'd suggest would be use the YouTube scheduling function, where you can publish the event ahead of time, give it the graphic, give it the title, body of whatever the message is going to be. We do that weekly. The only thing to look out for is YouTube has a auto live as soon as the stream hits. You probably want to disable that, so that way in the studio you fire up the stream, you can confirm that it's there, you can go to slate and silent before you push it live, and it gives your audience the announcement that you're going live soon.
And you mentioned a little bit while you were explaining as well, like the thumbnail is everything. The titles that you use in creating the titles, a hack is, searching if you have an idea of what you want to say, put that into YouTube and even look at some other messages that might have ranked really well, and maybe switch up some of the words in your title. That's always helpful. And then also just in the body copy, I believe I see this on the conversations with Tony Mobley, what hashtags, like a couple of them, putting them in to help being searchable. But then also you want to get engagement, give engagement. So have someone spend some time, if possible, during the week to comment on some other channels that are possibly faith-based channels as well. And then also I have David coming back. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, to Jeffrey's point, while you might you'd be tempted to disable comments, you can also enable them so that they're moderated, and then just volunteer somebody that they're the moderator for that week, and they can engage or disengage conversations with Tony Mobley and the ministry.
Did you just say volunteer? I love that.
Oh,
phrase.
yeah. That's my favorite word.
Telling them what to do.
Yes. Oh, and then also making use of shorts. Just pulling some key points out of the message and putting those into your shorts whenever a platform is doing something that's relatively new, that is, that they're going to push that. So that could be a way of the 30 seconds. I find myself when I'm just on YouTube that I'm clicking on shorts because I know it's 30, 60-second snackable content. The cover of whatever that it's talking about was engaging, and it's not going to take up that much of my time. Jeffrey?
Two more things. First of all, your congregation is going to help you immensely. So put out a word. I don't know if your show has an announcements section, put it in the announcements section or anything like that, and then get the word out and get volunteers to help you out, because some of them might be YouTube working with other YouTube channels and trying to, and of course they'll have all the ins and outs. And then of course take a look at chapters, because this show's not using the chapters the correct way, but if you do it right, then once again, if people just want to get to, the sermon, or they want to get to the announcements or something like that, they can click on the link, and then they'll get them to there in the post ability, so you can watch it from there.
And we do have upcoming in a few weeks, we'll be doing a conversation on YouTube marketing. So this is a great precursor. Next question.
John Filer, and I'm sorry about mispronouncing your name earlier, from Greenfield, Massachusetts, says, does anyone have a recommendation for a good power over Ethernet smart switch for hooking up security cameras?
Jason?
By smart switch, I'm going to assume that you mean smart power delivery. And my first tip is, truly, this is an expensive mistake to make if you get it wrong. Understand the difference between 802.3 AT, which is PoE+, and 802.3 BT, which is PoE++. Very, very different standards. So you need to know what your cameras are actually going to be expecting from your switch, and then just plan accordingly. I really like Ubiquiti.
Mitchell?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of our friends at Netgear. Here's what I'm using, the GS305 EP. And there are two flavors of this, as Jason indicated. One is 30 watts per channel, and another is like 60 or 70 to higher powered. But it's semi-smart. In other words, there's some things you can set up in it, other things you cannot. The one thing you don't want is a green feature. It'll turn the power over Ethernet on and off after a period. You want it to on all the time, particularly for security.
Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. Up next, does the Restream web player embedding move the bar for hybrid cross-platform events, or is YouTube embed still the gold standard?
Jeffrey.
The YouTube embed is still the gold standard for many, many reasons. To answer your question directly, I tested it once and I don't remember seeing that DVR function to that. So I don't think that that's a case, although Restream does record and stream at the same time. So you can go back to your settings and check your records. Restream also has a lot of tiered stuff when it comes to the embed. So like, for instance, the basic Restream plan, I think, is 1,000 hours and in a lower end resolution. And if you go to the premium, you could get up to, I think it's 10,000 hours in a higher resolution. So it's perfect for, if you want to do a webinar or something like that, do something that's not a YouTube function or YouTube event or anything. And you want to kind of privatize the group that are watching, that would be perfect for that. But YouTube is still the gold standard.
John?
A couple of things to remember. First of all, YouTube is the most reliable. And if you're trying to provide discoverability, remember YouTube is the second largest search engine on the planet. And so if it's tagged properly, people will find it there.
Good point. Next question.
Stefan Lindholm in Åbo, Finland says, does noise assist on the Mix Pre also affect side tone, or would that induce latency?
Courtney?
Well, being able to even affect side tone on a mix pre is really a dark art, and I think only people like Mickey Macacor and a few others who are really enlightened about the routing can get it to work if you're using it as a USB interface into Zoom. But that aside, it should not affect latency, because the latency of noise assist, which is an adaptive algorithm used in the digital signal processor, will only delay it 1 millisecond and at the most 2 milliseconds. And latency that would induce a problem into your side tone, you'd have to get up to about 200 milliseconds or more to even be bothered by it.
Mitchell's?
Yeah, like Courtney was saying, 1 or 2 milliseconds, I think your hearing can only really start to register when it gets up over 15 or 20. So you're well within the range of not having that head banging delay while you're talking. And the other thing is, why wouldn't they allow you to monitor it on the side tone? Because the side tone by its very nature is also a monitoring capability within the device. So you should hear it without noise, with noise assist, excuse me.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is up next. He says, has anyone had any experience, good or bad, with the Lumica bi-wireless line Wi-Fi cable? And he's got a link there.
All right, Chris. Well, it looks like right now, David is going to jump in and answer that for you. David?
I don't know about an answer, but whoever is behind marketing for a wireless line Wi-Fi cable makes no sense. But it looks like it's a tethering cable. You'll only get 30 feet down, which is pretty good for basic underwater stuff. But no, I don't have any personal experience, good or bad, except for the naming.
What might be helpful, Chris, is to drop that in Discord possibly, or hop into After Hours to see if someone else might have some further information on that. Bill?
I just want to nominate the wireless cable for the Oxymoron of the Year award. How do they manage to get both of those things in the same sentence baffles me entirely.
Next question.
Moving on to Kenneth Jones in Seattle, Washington. Does Office Hours 2 have a designated liaison to Office Hours Chat? How are the good ideas found there brought into the panel's discussion? Is this a job for someone?
Oh, that's a great question. I know that I will let Jeffrey go ahead first. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I think Chad is taking care of that, but we won't know. Alex would be the one to answer this question.
Yeah, I saw Chad has pulled over some comments that have been in chat into the panel side of things. And what I try to do is when there are comments or feedback in the chat, that I'm also bringing that into the conversation as well. Just some low hanging fruit ways for us to do that. But yes, it'd probably be good for when Alex comes in. Sounds like a good Sunday question as well, Courtney.
Yeah, and of course, if you have a good idea, enter it as a question into the actual show because, we can evaluate it as a question there and rather than just posting it in chat.
Yeah, that just gives additional feedback. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next. He says, what are some effective strategies for using your LinkedIn network to seek out a mentor to help reinvigorate one's career?
Nigel.
So I think you have to go back a step and ask, what are you trying to get a mentor to help you do? Because there are many different types of mentors in your career. There may be content mentors, there may be approach mentors, there may be all different types of things. And I have to tell you, LinkedIn is a fairly poor way of getting to those people. And I appreciate if you don't like to go to physical events, you don't like to meet people, you won't have a lot of any options. But most of us get once a week, every other day, somebody asking, would you mentor me? Would you give me stuff? And it's almost impossible to filter out who you're going to work with and who you're going to talk to and who you're going to spend time with unless you know them. The best place to find mentors is not generically online. It's in groups or bodies or other places where people meet, where you get more time to spend with someone. And you should think of finding a mentor very much like getting married. You're going to date for a while. You're going to find, whether you are or are not compatible. And it's actually quite a long time and a number of steps before you end up in a mentor-mentee relationship. And as the mentee, remember, you manage that relationship. They don't. You have to drive that relationship to make it work. So while I appreciate that, it's difficult to go to events for some people, it's difficult to go to big rooms full of people, you've got to find places where people talk and you can get to know each other and see whether there's some compatibility.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, the key word there for LinkedIn is groups. Get into the groups and bring out your questions and ask your questions and see who's answering them. And then start following them, and then ultimately start asking them, hey, is it okay if we can start some sort of mentor-mentee relationship here and get a good understanding that this is going to be a mentor-mentee? Don't just assume that it's going to happen.
Oni?
I agree with everything that has been said as far as using LinkedIn as a resource, but I would encourage Douglas to consider continuing what he is already doing in terms of reaching out in this community. And I think that this community, because people already have a relationship with him and they already know him, that this could be a even better source or resource for mentoring. And I just ask that, he continue to be interactive with as many people as possible, and he can glean a mentor from this community.
All excellent points. And Douglas, to as Tony just said, that you already showing up is the biggest thing. Because if you are looking at finding someone to be a mentor, most likely they are doing something, they are about their business, and they're probably very busy. So if you, and just think about it, how many other people are possibly reaching out to them. So if you're able to, Jeffrey made a point of engaging with them, whether that be in groups or just commenting, and think of it as not necessarily, think of how many people might just be asking them, can you be my mentor? Versus thinking of it as more as a long tail game of, okay, like on some of their comments, provide great feedback on their posts because they're sharing their thought process and their thought leadership, and then get to the point of possibly giving something before even making that ask. So if there's someone that you want to speak to and you found an article, share that, say you've been following them for a number of weeks or months. So it shows that you're already invested in the relationship before you ask them. So just as some icing on a cherry on top of all of the great feedback that's already been given. Good luck. Next question.
Keenan Campbell, Princeton, Illinois, comes up next. He says, what does the panel think of this module charging system? He's got a link there. And he says, it seems like it could really help with workflows. I will note that it's an Indiegogo project.
Rupert?
I just took a quick look at this. So it is looks like a startup product of some sort. Just a couple of things that sprang to mind when I took a look at it. It's sort of power pegboard type arrangement, and the the little outlets there that where those modules go into. I just wonder whether they'll get whether they need some protection on them to stop dirt or stuff getting in there. Because when you go to use them, you may find they're clogged up with something. And I would also, if I'm dealing with a lot of real expensive batteries, I just want to be sure myself that using something like that didn't void my warranty on my batteries. And I'd like to have seen some kind of locking mechanism or strain relief on the line mains level input on the side of that device.
Bill?
Such a massively competitive space these days with so many things and so many standards changing. I was thinking of how many adapters I have still in my life that plug into the wall to charge specific things. The battery space is getting broader, and there are 600-pound gorillas like Anker, which I think we've all run across, who have just a constantly evolving series of batteries that change as technology changes. I mean, they were all using a certain USB plug, and then they moved to a different USB plug, and then the USB-C, and that's all evolving. The density of the batteries and the battery chemistry is all charging. We know that Apple now has this refresher laptop things where they've got highly intelligent controllers that try to maximize the lifespan of batteries. All that, to me, makes it a very complicated thing. I like this approach in terms of the modularity, but I wonder if they're sophisticated and strong enough to be able to track all these changes as they happen and continue to build more and more intelligence into the product so that as the next generation of battery chemistry comes out in the next it's not going to be just one of those things that ends up in the closet sitting there forever. I wish them luck, and I love innovation that comes out of places like that, but half the time Indiegogo's things, more than half the time, just don't sustain for long periods of time. Good luck.
Courtney?
Well, since this product probably doesn't exist yet, I haven't looked at any teardown of it. And it would be interesting coming from an electrical point of view. It looks like a solution for the OCD in all of us, just to get rid of the wire tangle and so. But all of these little battery chargers that they show plugging into this common board usually start with a DC voltage, usually 5 volts or 12 volts. And they either buck or boost those voltages down to whatever the batteries need and charge the batteries. And so it looks like the little modules that you plug onto this plug board just adapt the battery interface, the charging interface for that particular type of battery to their 12-volt source. And I would worry about the fact that their master power supply that's supplying that DC voltage has enough current to power all of the strange combinations of things you could plug into it to charge all of those batteries as quickly as they're designed to charge. And the other thing is it induces a single point of failure. If somebody kicks the plug out when nobody's looking, all of your batteries will not be charged for everything. The production's going to come to a halt when somebody runs out of battery. So that I would vote against consolidating everything into one because it increases your single point of failure.
Next question.
Kenneth Jones in Seattle, Washington says, in regard Filmic Pro, what's the magic for getting a true 16:9 1080 stream into an ATEM? Todd had squashed curtained video when he tried it.
Well, it looks like we will have to possibly come back to that question. I'll invite you to maybe ask that question again tomorrow and or put it in the Discord community. Bill?
I will say that I've gotten 16:9 recordings out of Filmic Pro into the recording thing, but I've never tried to pass it through live. So it is capable of working in plenty of formats. One of the things, there is a resolution and raster menu in Filmic Pro, and it's got a tremendous number of possibilities, including full 16:9. So it can come out. I've just never tried to get it out live.
Rupert, real quick.
So I'd just say make sure you're using the Apple HDMI adapter and using the clean HDMI out and not just screen grabbing the phone.
And Tony.
And I'm using it every day, all day. And so far, as Rupert said, the Apple adapter is the key. Substitutes do not work. You must use the Apple adapter.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, Alex mentioned regretting purchasing a 14-inch MacBook Pro. Coming from a 15-inch MacBook Pro, would a 14-inch or a 16-inch be a better choice as a mobile adjunct to the desktop for both Xcode and other IT tasks and media production tasks?
Blue?
I bought the 16-inch initially and found it way too large to travel with. So I don't know, 3 days after I got it, I ordered a 14-inch, and about 2 months later, the 14-inch showed up, and I love it. And I came from a 13-inch, but I previously also had a 15, or actually, it's the last version, whatever, the i9 or something along those lines. I can't remember. I think that was 15 something. I really like the 14-inch structure. Now, if it was my only computer, I'd probably get the 16. But for travel, I love the 14-inch.
Bill?
For me, the key is that once I learned the trackpad and keyboard geometry of my first laptop that I used for editing, I have never changed from that. And even if I'm on a desktop machine and I'm working with a trackpad, I will position it below and to the center because I want all my muscle memory to work on everything I do. Whether it's a 16 or a 14, I find that I can work that way consistently because my thumb, which does most of the trackpad stuff, or the little pivot down if I have to do a pinch zoom or something like that, scales really easily. So for me, the fact that I compute always with exactly the same muscle movements, no matter what system I'm on, has made it easy for me to scale from 14 to 16 without a problem. So I agree with Blue that if I was traveling, I would try to be the lightest, most mobile we can. And we had actually a conversation, I think with, who was it that was, I know, Nigel was talking to us earlier before the show about the fact that he's even working with an iPad now. And I think some sort of trackpad with an iPad can do the same kind of thing. And you have rigs that do that. So to me, the operator geometry, what you expect, is even more important than the size of the machine.
Tony?
I would absolutely agree with everything that's been said. Also, a consideration, I think, would be to get a external monitor to use with the 14-inch when you're at home. But as far as being mobile and being able to utilize the full feature of the mobility is definitely to use the 14-inch.
And Nigel?
Yeah, so it's going to build on what Bill said. I think you really have to ask yourself what you want to do when you are mobile. Because if what you want to do is really take your desktop machine and all the power of your desktop machine with you, then you've got to have a powerful desktop machine. And the 16-inch offers some different combinations of memory and processor than the 14-inch does. If the reality is your mobile machine is really just an adjunct in terms of you're playing with things on the edge of things, if you can take an iPad with you with a smart Magic Keyboard, and you'll find that's really useful for that. So you got to look at the processors in each of them and decide how much processor you want to take with you as well.
Next question.
James Haldane, looks like in Vancouver, Canada, says, streaming from Zoom to YouTube, I did a test with my client's Zoom account and it would not allow me to stream. I was getting errors either in Zoom or YouTube. Any help?
All right, we're going to zip through the next few questions. Rupert?
Problems in this area generally related to permissions. So if you're using a client Zoom account, I would check that account has been set up in the back end on the web portal for the ability to stream to YouTube, like it's checked in the settings, and that the meeting that you're using doesn't have some specific setting which is overriding that, because that could be a separate setting at the meeting level. Then make sure that you are logging in to that account with your local app, that's actually the account that your Zoom application is connected to, so that you're going to pull down those permissions. If you are using the actual stream to YouTube feature, then pre-log in to YouTube on a separate browser window. Make sure those credentials are good, and make sure that when you go into YouTube, it's not jumping to your own personal login or something like that. If you still can't get around it, you can go to YouTube, set up a stream manually, get the streaming key, come back to Zoom and do a stream using the custom stream to RTMP and just use your streaming key instead.
David?
There you go. Everything Rupert said. Plus, if one other loophole is to bypass Zoom software encoder completely. If you have hardware like a A10 Pro that has the built-in streaming encoder, just plug all that info into the device rather than software and go that way. But it's all permissions, whether it's tenant and the tie-in between the two.
And Tony.
Everything that was already said, this is a permissions issue.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Nigel DeSalle. Is there a way to test which USB-C cable is which?
Nigel?
Yeah, about to move back to my original location. I have a bag of USB-C cables. I have no idea other than Thunderbolt which is which. How do I find out?
Courtney?
Well, I wondered what you meant by which is which. Because you mean whether one will handle Thunderbolt plus USB or just USB. Usually they'll be marked with a Thunderbolt insignia on the end of it rather than just the USB insignia, which is different. So you could do that to find out if they're rated as that. And the other way is just to try them if you can't figure out which is which. I was going to suggest I thought if you were talking about you had a bunch of cables plugged in that came out and you didn't know which USB-C went to which device and so on, and you could plug them in one at a time and monitor something like the device manager in Windows or the list of USB devices in Mac and determine which cable goes to which device. But I see you're trying to figure out which ones are rated for Thunderbolt and which ones are just USB-C only. There may be a tester out there, but I'm not familiar with one.
Jason, real quick.
In Mac OS, if you go into System Report and then go to Thunderbolt/USB 4, connect a hub up to the device, it will actually show you which mode the cable is in. And so you can kind of reverse that and figure out, what it's doing. And then just a drop of nail polish on the end will tell you what it does.
Next question.
Next one comes from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. He says, what tall mast, like the Studio Assets SA1241 Mega Mast carbon fiber camera stand, which is 27.5 feet tall, have people had good luck with for under $1,000 US?
Bill?
I've never had any luck with them, and I'll tell you what the problems have been for me. I used to have one tall stand, a 17-footer that I kept around, but only for indoor audio, getting a speaker up to the top of a ballroom as my tertiary failsafe. Whenever I put a camera on a really tall mast, even if I run guy wires to the top and I had turnbuckles to try to straighten them out, when the wind comes through, that much tall, slim stuff would vibrate, and I would always have trouble with the camera shots being usable. Now, I will say that cameras have better stabilization now than back when I was trying to do this, but I was never able to get a really happy shot out of a camera that high up in the wind in an outdoor setting. There are more robust tower crank-up systems that I think can do that, and obviously there are booms and things like that that are designed for that purpose, but just stands, I've never been satisfied. Hopefully your experience might be different.
Next question.
Next one from Douglas Carmichael. Mitchell, you talked about using a small amount of reverb with your voice when you were setting up your Studio Technologies 205 console in After Hours. How do you set up your reverb to not be overbearing in a non-music application?
Mitchell?
Wouldn't that be cool if I could actually do that? I think you might have misheard me, Douglas. I was talking about the Studio 205 actually has a compressor built into it, and there's a little bit of compression going on, but to answer your question, a little bit of reverb is okay. A lot of reverb is bad. Just listen carefully to when Courtney decides to do his voice of God imitation. It's very impressive.
And Courtney, real quick.
I don't know what you're talking about there, Douglas. It can be overbearing, can't it?
Next question.
TJ Asher in Minneapolis, Minnesota says, please recommend a sleeve or case for a MacBook Pro 13-inch to protect it in my carry-on bag.
David.
It was a MacBook. Sorry, I misread that as an iPad. I was looking at the 12 South book case. It's pretty slick. It disguises your device to look like a book. But we'll talk offline. I'll find everyone.
Next question.
Eduardo Augustine, Panama, says Mac Mini versus B-Link for graphics and side work.
Courtney?
How deep are your pockets? That's the difference. You'll pay a lot more for the Mac Mini. One difference is if you're going into Zoom, if you're using the less expensive, these B-Links, sorry about that, with that they no longer make, or the 4125 processor, have a plethora of outputs. They have 2 HDMI outputs. They have no dongles are required, so that's a good thing. But they're only quad core. And if you need more than 4 cores, you might want to go to the Mac Mini. But the B-Links work great for just video playback, and they're like $200. Some of them for under $200. So something like that can give you 2 HDMI outputs, can play back video, and it'll run anything Windows can run. Runs Windows 10, Windows 11, and has gigabit Ethernet, all that stuff built in, and no dongles required. So it's a cheap way to get in, and you can stack a whole bunch of them in a small amount of space. And they're much smaller than the Mac Minis and use less power.
All right, that wraps up our first hour, a little bit over, but we're going to dive into our discussion around client management. So this is a great time to add your questions if you are in Mukana so that we can address them. And we speak a lot about the end product here and the process of virtual events and film productions or shows. But even before you get to that phase, there's someone, the person with the purse strings, or the stakeholders who actually need the work done. And it's a great opportunity for us to discuss, well, outside of sales, but how do you actually manage your client? What are some of the best ways for you to do that? And client retention, even as they say, 80% of a company's revenue is based on about 20% of the clients. So we're going to get into this discussion around what works, what doesn't, and even some of the process that it takes to actually deal with clients. And Nigel, well, you can go ahead and get started.
So I just wanted to start with a thought that you should be really careful about your client thinking they're being managed. So there can be nothing more annoying as a client when you think your agency is trying to manage you, because that feels like they're not listening to you. And the single most important skill in client relationships is listening. And someone mentioned it earlier, actually, really understanding what the objective of what they're trying to do, then placing yourself in the position you can do the maximum to achieve that. And that doesn't mean you have to do what they say regardless of what they ask, because if there's a better way to do it, if there's a smarter way, if there's a different way, partly, your job is to help them do that as well. So don't manage them. Try and listen to them, understand. Now, there's a huge difference between a client giving you $1,000 piece of work and a client giving you $100,000 piece of work. And the relationship will be different depending on it. But don't try and manage, try and enable.
Yeah, that's a great point. And even in client, when it does come, what does client management, what is it? It's basically just how you engage with your client, and whether that be, in some important parts to that is what I like to call PAC. And that's your process, your automation, and then your communication. So that's where you get into your process of how you onboard your client. And if this is, and it ranges, if you're inside of a corporation, you might not necessarily be the one from the sales pipeline, but when you have to interact with them and interface with them, are there templates that you can start to use so that you're not reinventing the wheel each time? Are there systems that you have in place that will help with automation, because certain kinds of projects that these are the certain elements that you use? And then most importantly, like, communication is a big part of it, because your client is looking to make sure that they know what deadlines, what are the expectations, making sure you've set expectations really well. And when a problem arises, how do you communicate? There are several tools out there, project management tools, where that could be not only for your team, but then also for the client to be abreast, because at the end of the day, they're making an investment in you, in your team, in how the work gets done. And for some of those, it could be the Asanas of the world. Some people, just a simple Google Docs, a Google spreadsheet will help do that. Slack, as well as some of the tools out there that helps. Bill?
This is so complicated because all of a sudden you think you're doing business, but you're doing psychology, and you're trying to figure out the infinite variability of human beings, because every client is unique a little bit. What motivates one might not motivate another. What you think is helpful might not be perceived as being helpful. That can change month to month. I mean, most of the time you start to get to understand what your clients need and what motivates them and how you can best help and empower them. Because at the end of the day, they're going to keep going back to people who make them feel secure and make them feel valued. That is really the bottom line in every creative relationship with a client I have ever had. But some people are more hard to accomplish that with than others. And I've run across all the time, all different kinds up and down the chains. The best you can do is just try to listen as carefully as you can, not just to what they're saying, but how they're saying it. Because I've had valuable clients who came to me a little bit jangled, and you could tell that somebody above them had said, you must make something happen. And they are out of sorts for a moment, and they can reflect that back on you. And if you take that as they think I'm doing something wrong, rather than they're just in an environment where they're having a rough time, and if I can get them settled and confident and feeling like this will get done regardless of how things are going, trust me, we'll get it done. That can be the most important thing in terms of that bonding. Every time you can legitimately solve a problem that is causing your client grief, you are tightening that bond. And really, that's all we can do for them over and over again, is just make them feel better about the fact that we're in their corner. And they will come back to you even if somebody else lowers a price or promises extra service. It is those human attachments of this team has helped me in the past over and over again. I will stay bonded to them because I believe they will help me the next time.
Yeah, you make an excellent point, even just around the relationship side of it and the comfortability aspect. I recall that there was a project that we were working on, and it was a fire that needed to be put out. They hired our team, and the lead person, that it was actually their client. So they weren't able to show up, but our team, we were respectful. There was trouble on site, but we handled it really well, and ultimately making, that agency look really good. And that's what people are looking for ultimately, are those people or problem solvers. If I were to say some of the attributes or the soft skills necessary for client management, client relationship, is being patient. When we're trying to extrapolate information, or if there is a fire that needs to be put out, that someone who's level-headed and is able to move calmly and think quickly on their feet, but just being able to do that is the some months ago we spoke about it, is like that word of mouth that goes out. It helps to build your reputation ultimately, because these people are typically clients, and or if there's an account manager on your team, they're typically under the gun, under fire, under pressure. And when we're able to provide them with some peace of mind and some assurity, that goes a really, really long way. Let's get into some of these questions.
Absolutely. The first one comes from David Brady in New York City, and he says, what kind of Jedi mind tricks can get clients to deliver their contents ahead of showtime?
Don't know if that exists, David. Courtney?
Yeah, I wish I could get Obi-Wan as our project leader, because the only thing I can find is to give them a deadline at least 2 days before the event to have all materials in. Because you never know, if you're getting something from the client, you don't know what format it's going to be in. You don't know if it's video, what codec was used, and there's millions of different combinations of codecs and frame rates and sound versions, etc., and levels and so on. And so try and get that from them in advance, and That way you have time to work out you have to have at least a day to work out any problems and get them ironed out before you don't want to have them presenting something to you on the night before, the day of the show. Oh, we'll bring everything on a thumb drive. Don't worry. And this happened to me recently on a big live show. They showed up, all their videos were being delivered. They gave it to the video projection guy in the booth, and it was a format that they could not translate into what they were using to do their iMagen presentation, which was a closed system. It was a codec that just wouldn't translate. And so none of the videos worked in the entire show. So, you got to deal with that stuff ahead of time and allow enough time to work out the problems and transcode stuff if you need to. And in my case, with scripts, it's a huge problem because they're always wanting to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite up till, they're in the car on their way to the event. Oh, well, I made 52 changes here. This word sounds better than this word. And you get there and we're providing the teleprompting, and we've already formatted the script that they gave us, 2 days before for the teleprompter, and we've changed it all and got it all set up. And then they go, oh, this isn't the latest script when they do the rehearsal, 10 minutes before the show goes live. I made some changes. Didn't you get those changes? No, inevitably we didn't get the changes. And you have to bang them in manually, or they give you a thumb drive. Even worse, they give you a thumb drive with a new version of the script without the changes marked. And so now you got to go back into that script and clean up the whole script from top to bottom all over again, even though they only changed one word. But since they didn't mark it, they didn't tell you where the changes are. And this is important, especially if they're slide cues or video roll-in cues, and they eliminated a video cue or something. I've seen things go horribly wrong with changes made at the last minute. So the only thing you can do is try and get them to turn it in ahead of time, and to give you a script or a rundown of the show. Because a lot of times, you're preparing a show and you're completely in the dark. You've been booked for the show. You're going to provide services of some type, let's say AV services or teleprompting services in my case. And you haven't seen a script, and we're still working on the script. We're still working on the script. That's what I hear every time. The night before, I say, "Do you have the script?" Because we got to prepare this for the show. Oh, we're still working with it. You'll have it by 5:00. And we're having to prep a gear. And we may not know what gear to prep until we hear the script. Is it 2 people speaking at the same time? Are there 2 podiums required? Do we have to have multiple microphones? Is there a choir that's going to sing? You don't know any of this stuff until you see the script. And since they constantly want to rewrite the script until the last second, you may be in the dark about what even equipment to show up with. So try and get as much information out of them as you can ahead of time without being a pest. And that's the big problem, especially if you're having to go through a secondary producer that wants to deal with the client. If you have to deal with the producer and then the producer has to deal with the client, you're one step away, and the producer never wants to annoy the client, so you're constantly pestering the producer, and they don't want to pester the client, and you end up with nothing. So I always try and, as far as delivery of materials go, try and find a liaison directly with the client without having to go through too many steps. And that way it will prevent things from being dropped along the chain of communication.
Bill?
All of those things that Courtney mentioned are absolutely critical, and more that he hasn't gone into. This is the bane of everyone's existence who's ever worked on. The only strategy that I ever came across that actually helped a little bit, and it didn't solve everything, but helped a little. We always tried to be really close and form the best relationship we possibly could with the CEO's admin, because that human being, male or female, has the ear of the person at the top of the organization. And if all else fails, saying, "Hey, John," or "Hey, Sally, I've got this problem. If we don't get this in the next 48 hours, we're going to have all sorts of problems and it might not work." A call from that person, not the CEO, you don't have to bother them, but a call from the CEO's admin could often break loose most of the organizational entropy that was keeping these things from getting done. But like I said, that's maybe a 20-30% of the time I'd go there.
Yeah, the gatekeeper is the key has the keys to the kingdom. And just in addition to what Courtney said as well, it's just anticipating. Once you have gotten a chance to see the temperament of the client and what the response time is, if it might be your standard is 2 days in advance, you might need to back that up. So just understanding who you're dealing with and the static that might be between them getting the content around it. This is an ongoing issue, so you are not alone. Next question.
Next one comes from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. For longer contracts, how do you manage expectations as the technology changes? I have a request for a 3-year contract, and I'm uncomfortable with that long a term.
Nigel.
So I think it's all about how the contract is written and the objectives and the conditions within the contract. That if you are doing a contract based on technologies over 3 years, then you are a magic person that can see into the future. I think if you're doing a contract based on objectives and delivery of certain facilities and capabilities, then you're fine. And reality is, if you can get the price set to what it is today, then you want to be able to change the technologies to increase the amount of money you make. And then within the contract, you can decide if you're going to pass some of those benefits on. But any 3-year contract, unless you are providing specific things like, processors and memory and something like that, I would really try and keep out of specifying the technology, because 3 years away, anything can have changed.
Yeah, and clauses will be your friend. So hopefully there's a lawyer possibly, or this could be an opportunity to bring a lawyer in to look at the contract so that there could be some clauses to add, check-in points around year X or, year 1, 2, or monthly to just help you cover yourself. Courtney?
Yeah, and if you're providing labor, you have to take that into consideration in the contract, and the contract should reflect that it reflects the current wages and working conditions of any particular labor unions that you're having to use, because those things change from year to year. So you have to incorporate some degree of flexibility in the contract, and that the changes for that each, if you're negotiating a price per year or something like that, you have to take those, you have to have enough slack in the contract to accommodate cost of living changes and labor changes, et cetera.
Great points. Next question.
Next question from Eduardo Augustine in Panama. How to ensure clients don't focus more on the price instead of the value? It seems client management is more like psychology.
Nigel.
There's always psychology in anything, including, my favorite of which is a flinch is always worth 10%. So when you give them the price and they flinch, that's normally worth 10% in any negotiation. So try not to flinch. Mostly this is really about the objectives of the project and who you're dealing with in the project. And it's a very general question, because you might be dealing with someone high up in the organization or low down in the organization. But if you can agree what the business benefit is that they're going for and what they're trying to achieve, then it's much easier to get out of the price only. If you are specifically delivering to a very technical recommendation where they may be price shopping you, it's much harder to do, particularly if you're responding to an RFP where the RFP is really designed to get the lowest cost supplier for a particular capability. 2 other things, and I know they're both a bit glib, but they are useful sometimes. Number 1, if you can't change your client, change your client. There comes a point where there are just some people who will only buy on price, know the price of everything and the value of nothing. It's really hard to build a sustainable business relationship with somebody like that. The second one is, depending who you're dealing with in the organization, never accept a no from someone who can't say yes. People too quickly, accept a no or try and find the price. They think they're negotiating with someone who actually isn't the person that could say yes. And at some point, you've got to get to that person. Then when they say no, then you can't go any further.
Blue?
Yeah, this is such a great question. So one of the ways to get clients to not focus on price is to not compete as a commodity, but rather come in and be a strategic resource for your client. And when you can be a strategic resource and they see you as a valued partner, not just as the person that provides a projector and a microphone, it's going to help change that. The other thing, generally speaking, we don't line item gear. There's a price down at the bottom. And that way you don't have people start to go, let's eliminate this, let's eliminate that, let's eliminate that, let's eliminate that. Because they don't know what they're eliminating typically. And of course, at some point in the middle of that, they're going to eliminate something that you actually need, not knowing any better. And, oftentimes we get questions, right, when we do stuff like that, because that's how we work with all of our clients. I have this other quote from a company that gave me all of the price points for each of these things, and I need that in order to make a decision. And our response generally is, no, you don't. And I know that's, again, to Nigel's point, a little bit glib, but they don't need that to make the decision, especially if they see you as a strategic partner and not just as a vendor. So,
Bill?
This is really tough stuff. And you know, one of the things that I've done forever is I have two things that I usually develop. One is what I call my production estimate, and that was all my numbers, and it was a FileMaker-based thing that did a lot of calculations, including adding up categories like all the production costs and adding a certain amount to that for contingencies, adding up all the post and adding a certain amount for contingencies. I'd go through that entire thing with all the equipment and all the personnel and everything and get that number. And then I would move to my real form, which was the quote that was very much what Blue is talking about in terms of, it said, I will provide this with these categories, this many days of this many shooting or whatever, and here's a number at the bottom. And that's what eventually went to the client. The only time I had to fall back to the production estimates, or when I got tied up with, and I'm going to say this term and I shouldn't because it's really kind of pejorative, the bean counters, that everybody talks in corporations about the people who are there to just ride the money, period. And it devalues what they actually do because they're there to help the management of the corporation survive and things like that. And if you don't count the beans, you end up not having anything to eat the next year, and that's very bad. So those people do a really good function, but those are the people who live and breathe getting into spreadsheets and going line by line. If in the few cases where I had to do that, I would sit down with them, and I found it actually pretty easy because as long as I understood every single cell in that document and what I had applied to it and why the numbers that they were seeing on a subhead section were a little different than the ones, as long as they could all balance out and justify, they were completely happy. And then I would say, you know, you want to change something, let's go up. You want to go from 4 cameras to 2 cameras? We can do that. I'll put in the 2 numbers and here's how it all changes. Is that acceptable? Now understand, you're going to have 2 cameras out there, so it's going to be a different show. And I'll talk to the folks who are planning the meeting and see if that's acceptable. But that's how you change your numbers. If you want to change your numbers, there is no other way that we can get in here. And that seemed to solve all the problems for me.
One word, trust. Trust is, there's this book called The Trusted Advisor, just as a resource for anyone who wants to listen to that. When there are different categories of clients, and there are some that depending on what stage you are in your business, where all they're looking at is the dollars for whatever reason that is. But as Blue has said, as many have said before, when you're pitching whatever the RFP, looking at them as a partner and really getting them to see you as a partner, because at that point they know that you have because you've demonstrated that you have their best interest at hand, you can do the work. So being able to have that trust with them, sure, there might be some need for negotiation on the price, but they're looking at you as a resource and as the solution and not going back and forth on price. And that's when you look at what kind of client that you're dealing with. So those are some really key points there. Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana, is next. Does anyone do process sheets for clients specifying a timeline and material you need for the project?
John.
So 30 years in business, what the process that we followed was a vision and scope, or a scoping document. And the scoping document, once that was signed off on, turned into a requirements document. Requirements document turned into a Gantt chart, and the deliverables were outlined on the Gantt chart, and including the payment schedule as well. And so that's the process that we follow.
Bill?
Yeah, we had Gantt charts. Some clients wanted Gantt charts or PERT charts to track, time and materials and show up. It was very rare, mostly in the more creative ones. That people come out of architecture are really used to working with those kind of things, particularly building builders and things like that. So the very few jobs I had with those people, that was their native language, and we had to learn it.
And there are a lot of the tools nowadays that you can use for project management also have templates. So that's just as a baseline to help you get started, and then being able to build them out and then creating your own template from the template that you use. So that's just something to consider as well. And this is a great opportunity to our producers. Thank you so much for the great questions that you have already. Any additional questions around client management, the relationship side, the tools, the resources, even listening to some of the pitfalls that we've had, feel free to enter them now. Next question.
Roscoe Jones, Brea, California, says, are different skills needed for managing a new client versus a repeating client, such as in selling versus friendliness?
Ooh, that is a great point. When even just thinking, some of the skills fundamentally are the same, of just people skills, soft skills in the negotiation times of things. But typically when looking at someone who is doing account management, we've been saying a lot about client management. Account management is the person who's over the account, is just being detail oriented, being a great lister, and just their speed in following up with projects, with requests, because there's nothing worse than a client feeling like they're neglected or that their questions aren't being answered in a timely fashion. And Blue?
Yes to everything Liberty just said. And, I think in addition to that, just remember you're only ever one decision away from being the previous vendor, not the current one. So generally speaking, we don't tend to treat our repeat clients all that much differently than our new clients. Of course, we don't need to get to know them quite as well, but because we know them already, because we've been through this process, right, of doing an event production together, which gets people really close together. But beyond that, we treat them very, very much the same, with a very few minor exceptions.
Bill?
It's really easy to fall in the trap of, I've had this client for 5 years, they're never going to leave me, so I'm going to treat the new ones like gold, and I'll just do the great job that I've always done for the old clients and keep them happy. And sometimes they can tell that you're focused a little more energy on the new ones than you are on the old ones, and that's a very bad place to get to be. Also, I will say that in the beginning, when you're trying to build a business, you want to take anything that comes through the door, because this is a potential cash flow. You learn more as you go on to really think about who you add to your client roster. And you're doing as much in a new client of vetting them to see if they're a good fit for the way you work. I've had a couple of circumstances, and one of my relatives was in advertising, and they actually had a marquee brand name client that they had to resign because in a bidding war and that thing, the client just got abusive, and they had to hold on to, if we keep this particular client, it's going to drag our whole shop down because they're just being unreasonable. So they gave up a multi-million-dollar client because it had turned into an abusive relationship. So pay attention. I know that the normal desire is that anybody comes to the door, thank you, I'll take your money and I'll work as hard as I possibly can. And we all get that. If you're having trouble making the monthly rent in your offices, you got to do what you got to do. But at some point, paying attention to who you want to work with is a way to plant seeds that will eventually flower into a happier business for you, I believe.
Courtney?
Yeah, new clients are kind of tricky because you have to do your research on your end without the client necessarily knowing about it. Find out who referred you. You might ask them, how did you hear about us? Find out who referred you, and then talk to that person who referred you to find out if, this client is a deadbeat. They did work for me and I never got paid. Well, you got to be careful about that, and tactfully work out the method of payment in advance. If it's a new client and you haven't established an opening credit line for them, discuss, you're a new client, so we're going to require a 50% deposit in advance and the balance on completion of the job, or just work out the payment details ahead of time so it's not a surprise at the last minute. You show up on set and you're expecting to get a check from them and they go, oh, we didn't bring our checkbook with us. Oh, well, it'll be in the mail in a couple of weeks, so. And don't necessarily be impressed by the size of the client. Many times I'll get a job from Disney or from a major production entity, and then you realize that major production entities are multinational corporations that have that pay invoices on a strange level, usually 60 to 90 days. And if you don't realize that going in ahead of time, you're going to be fronting all of your employees' salaries because you're required to pay them within 2 weeks, and you may not be getting paid on that invoice for another 3 months. So you have to have enough float to be able to cover a new client, even a big client, who you're not afraid of not getting paid. You're just afraid of getting the payment in time to meet your payroll.
Such good points. And Dr. Clark made a comment that maintaining a client or client relationships can be like maintaining your marriage. Say, I love you twice a day at least. And just to add to what Courtney shared as well, is just when you're looking at the clients that you are maintaining or your repeat clients, is that level of anticipating and that research that you need to do is like anticipating their needs. You might have this project with them or event, but how else can you help them? What other problems can you help to solve them for them? Because your ability to get ahead of that before they're actually looking for another vendor is just a way for you to continue to build on the relationship. And of course, getting more work for yourself and for your team. Next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia says, is it a good idea to hire a professional with great skills to do the client interaction when you can afford to do so?
Bill?
So I want to talk a little bit about, when I was in radio, one of the most interesting evolutions I went through, I started out as a DJ, so I was considered myself kind of on the creative side. Then I became production director, so I was creating ads and things like that. And these sales folk used to come through, the men and women who were out in the field selling stuff. And I kind of felt that gap between some people call it the suits and the jeans, or the creative team and the suit team, and I didn't really understand what they did. And then as I got to know some of them a little bit, I went out with them on an occasional sales call and stuff like that. And I started to understand that what they do is astonishingly important and very difficult. And I really changed my attitude. I mean, I was on the receiving end of them coming back on Friday and dumping a whole bunch of production sheets on my desk where I would have to stay, until 10 or 11 o'clock at night, getting all the ads ready for the next rotation. And I kept trying to push them to do it earlier. And then I started to understand that they would spend the entire week just grooming these relationships and making it as solid as possible so that they could get that one sale and then take the weekend and go do something else. And it was so hard. And I became so impressed with the different set of skills they had that I could never do, that I realized that without me, the station could keep going because they'd find somebody else. Without those folks, the whole pyramid would fall down. So when you're talking about great skills for client, or great skills that that you don't have that somebody else has, if you can afford to bring it in, those people can be worth their weight in platinum for you in terms of taking the load off. It is also those soft skills and those weird skills, like in radio, it was selling time. And I never understood how weird that was until one of the sales guys would say, I'm selling them this idea that we're going to excite some waves and send them out into the atmosphere, and that people are going to do something based on that. But, 3 seconds after we broadcast it, it doesn't exist anymore. I'm selling this weird thing. It's not like a camping stool that's going to be in their life forever. I'm promising them that if we excite these radio waves and send them out, they'll get more business. It is fundamentally a disconnect, and some people can do those kind of jobs and some people just can't. And so I've been respectful my whole life of the people who work on the other side of that. And that's what you're asking about. Is it good to add to what you are great at with what somebody else is great at? And it can be a real big boost if you can find people who are willing to do it for you.
So true. Blue?
Not to disagree with anything that Bill just said, because I agree that, salespeople are incredibly valuable. But as a small business owner and somebody who maybe is just starting out, or even if you've been in business for a little bit, you're your best salesperson. You are going to be the person who can sell your services the absolute best to anybody. I think generally speaking, we have a decent sized company. And in the end, we don't have salespeople. It comes down to my wife, conversations with my wife and myself who run the business together. And, that's in the end who the best relationship is going to be, the best relationship builder is going to be. Maybe at some point we'll change that. Maybe once we become a, 8-figure business or something like that, which I don't think we are yet. But so far, I'm my best salesperson.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of mentors saying like you're the face, like people get to know you. And to Blue's point, just being able to sell, because there's a je ne sais quoi about you and why that they've decided to work with your team. Courtney?
Yeah, I've always hated marketing people, sorry. But I do my own marketing because I've always been burned by them because you hire, a really good marketing person, and they tend to want to, they want to make their percentage on the deal. So they want to close the deal at any cost. And so you have to outline very carefully to that marketing person has to understand your business, understand your cost, understand your limitations, and not overpromise. Because the worst thing you can have is have a really great marketing person that brings in a sale. They bring it in at a low cost, and they promise the client, 15 things that you can't really do without hiring outward personnel in order to do the job that was as promised by the marketing person. So that disconnect between the actual functionality of the company and what the marketing people promise can be the downfall of many companies, because then the client is disappointed when you can't deliver what the marketing person promised, and you'll lose money because in order to deliver what the marketing person promised, you have to go out and hire, increase your cost to the point where you're losing money on the job. So I have to be very careful of hiring outside marketing people, and I have to make sure that I will promote somebody into that job that has worked inside the company and knows the job and knows the company and knows the costs inside out and knows the product that they're selling inside out, and promote them into a marketing position rather than to hire an outside marketing firm that has no clue.
And then also just looking back at the question of like knowing your strengths, because there's one part to this client management of the actual selling part of it. But then once you've actually landed the client and you're still the point person, because typically for projects, I am the person, but then there's a handoff so that there's someone who can give them more attention, more of the answering their questions in a much more responsive way. So if that communication is not necessarily your strength, definitely books and resources and training, because to Blue and to Courtney's point, you can put your best foot forward about your business. But again, how well are you? If you're not a responsive person, then possibly getting an EA or a VA to help you with that so that it will strengthen your ability to be responsive, because there's nothing worse than you're trying to get in touch with your vendor or someone on your team and they can't. So just a side note there, not necessarily the marketing side of it, but the functional part of managing the relationship with the client. Bill?
And I don't disagree with anything Blue said. And in fact, that's how I ran my whole business life. I was the center of it, or my wife, who is much actually better than I am at all those client relationship things. And you can do beautifully with that. I just am also informed by the fact I sat with a lot of CEOs, and one of the first questions they ever asked when people pitched ideas to them is, can it scale? And that's the one negative of having a key person. If the key person gets taken out for any reason, the business is on really, really shaky ground. So if you decide that you wish to build a thing that will be pass-alongable or sustainable when you're on vacation or when you're down with a massive broken leg because you were out riding your fun motorcycles because you were finally doing well enough to indulge yourself in the things you love to do, how do you sustain that? So maybe key man insurance, key person insurance now, because men and women run companies equally and everything in between. But that planning for succession is also a serious part if you're going to build something that has lasting value.
And a book that has been a great resource, Personal Touch, just in how to continue to keep not only for meeting people, but then even the relationships that you have, how to maintain them. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Roscoe Jones in Brea, California. Should the top decision maker for the production, the director or the producer, be the point of contact with the client? Why or why not?
Oh, I have a feeling I know what Courtney's going to say, Bill.
Well, once again, it depends on the client. There's so many of these things, some people like working principal to principal, and that's all they'll ever accept. And if I didn't show up because I had the relationship with that client, they felt like they weren't being taken care of. Other people have different feelings about that. And I remember one of the most successful presentations we ever did. I stood in the back of the room. My wife and 3 other members of our team at the time did the presentations. They mentioned me once at the end, and then the CEO of that company came up to talk to me for 5 minutes afterwards, and we sealed the deal. And it was because I think we appeared a little bigger and stronger than we were, because the principal, in my case, me, wasn't doing it. I looked like I had a bigger team to take on some of those responsibilities. They did a bang-up job, and I realized I didn't have to do it. So that just it purely depends on your circumstances and where you're trying to build and grow your organization.
Courtney?
Yeah, I've always tried to get as close to the top as possible to the decision makers, that at least not directly interfacing with them, but at least getting the information from them. If you're working on a commercial, clients will put out a series of storyboards as, okay, this is what we want, and it'll have things drawn on those storyboards that they want. And then they'll hire a production company, and the director will come in and go, here's the director's boards. Okay, well, they may be a little bit different from what the client, what the ad agency's boards look like, or the client's boards look like. So you have to take both of those into account. But you'll never go wrong by delivering what was on the client's boards to begin with, because regardless of what the director has in mind, if they don't deliver what the client wanted originally, they're not going to be happy. So always try and at least get an idea of what the client really wants, and take that as the goal for achieving your job.
So I'll say that the director should not be the point of person for the project. And I do come from like an agency background, as well as like having that person who is solely dedicated to whatever the client needs, and is, and if anything, whether it be possibly another producer or an assistant producer who will then be able to let the director focus on the shoot and all of that, but like have that person, some middle person who can then, their sole job is just running comms between both parties. Next question.
Jack Cannon in Thermopylae, Ukraine. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. I hope you're safe. How do you fire a client when you have found them too troublesome to work with?
This is an important question. Thank you for asking that, Courtney.
Use the calendar, Luke. Use the calendar as your friend. Scheduling is your friend. Just tell them, oh, I'm sorry, we're booked on those days. Gee, if you'd just gotten to us a little earlier, but sorry, we just can't do it for you.
Blue.
If you're going to use the calendar, be prepared for the follow-up question, which is, well, what dates will work for you?
Right.
Because if you use the calendar and that's the question and you don't have an answer, you're up a creek. Generally speaking, we take one of two approaches when we have a client that has been difficult to work with. Number one, we raise the price to the point where it would be acceptable to work with that person. And oftentimes that increase in price is going to have them go away by itself. But whatever that price point is, be okay with that number. And that's usually the primary thing that we will do. And it works more often than not. And every once in a while they stick around, but if they do, I'm now being paid enough that it's worth it. And then the other approach is a little bit of honesty. We're taking our business in a different direction, and we're looking for a slightly different type of client. So we really have appreciated your business, and good luck. Here's a couple of options that you may find good to work with, and then send them to your competitors that you don't like.
That's so important. What the last part of all of what you said, Blue, but just that last part of, if it really isn't a good fit, to let them know, but then don't leave them hanging, because you never want to burn bridges. It really shows that, again, a client, it is the relationship with the person. So right now it's not a good fit, but here are some people, and just being mindful of maybe even talking to those people in advance. We've done that many times where we'll say, hey, we've got this client, they need XYZ. Are you comfortable? And share the pitfalls too, as well. And just so that you help them land on their feet. That goes a long way. Courtney?
Yeah, there's something Blue brought up there that I, forgot to mention that and take into consideration. If it is a client you want to work with, but your calendar prevents you from working them, referrals are interesting. Always provide them with a referral, but refer them to somebody who's more expensive than you are. And that way you'll be sure to get them back after that one job that you can't do for that client if it's a client you want. And as Blue said, if it's a client you don't want, refer them to your competitors who are undercutting you in price, and so that they won't have a good experience.
All these valuable gems only on office hours. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, could you see a market for a professional management agency that would handle client management skills for media professionals on the autism spectrum?
Oh, wow. Great question, Douglas. Jason?
Yeah, I can see the possibility. I can see the market segment. And my first, second, and third concern would be that you could be taken advantage of. The moment you immediately cut yourself off from your ability to interface with your clients and their expectations directly, you put yourself in a very vulnerable place, more vulnerable perhaps than the ASD might be putting you in to begin with.
Next question.
Liberty White, Atlanta, Georgia says, what client mishaps can you share, and what did you learn from it?
I guess I will dive in with this one. I remember that there was, it's been a little while since this project in question, but this speaks to the point of having a middleman, of just the communication. There was a comms miscommunication between the client, because there was another video team. We were doing the live stream. There was a video production team, and there were just the syncing on the who, what, where, when did not happen. And this in full disclosure, just like it was this last minute, the week of. So just also being mindful when those things happen, knowing when to put your foot down to say, well, if we do not get this information, then this is what will happen, and being very clear in explaining that to them. So that might light a little bit of a fire under their tail, but we still went ahead with it. We thought we did a great job under the circumstances. So preface it there. However, there was just some back and forth with the client and ultimately their client. And I just learned never again, no matter how high profile the client is, that if we don't have what we need and if there's poor communications, at the end of the day, it's going to reflect on our team, my brand, and just sometimes not all money is good money. So you just have to walk away sometimes. So Blue.
So we, generally speaking, treat the majority of our clients exactly the same. It doesn't matter if they're doing, 5 events with us over the course of a year or just one. Our interaction with them, how we engage with them, the platforms that we use to engage with them, all of that generally is the same. What clients really don't like to hear is we treat everybody the same. So I made that mistake, I want to say about 8 years ago, with a client who at the time was responsible for about 25% of our business. And of course, she wasn't a huge fan of that particular statement. So I had to find a way to gently walk that back, and then treat her the same as everybody else anyway. Just some things may be true, but clients don't necessarily need to hear
it. Bill?
The only one I can think of that I really actually didn't recover from, and it was a weird circumstance. We had a long-standing relationship with a relatively large client that had been going for 8 or 9 years. They brought in, there was a new, quote, producer who came to do a new project with us, and we were looking forward to working with her. And after the first 3 meetings, I realized he had no clue what she was doing in this thing. And that would have been fine because we would have tried to handhold and bring her along. But then the lies started about why things weren't there and what was happening. And then we heard from the client that all of those things were getting blamed on us as opposed to the person taking it. And I do believe truly she was just far over her head, because her job in the liaison with us had to do a lot with deadlines and getting creative work done and back and forth, and just I don't know what her circumstances are, but none of it got done. So I don't know, and eventually it ended up costing us the beginning of a rocky relationship that ended with that client there, because somehow enough of it splashed back. And it was just a weird circumstance, because the people upstream from that, including all the way up to the top suite, had changed not too long before that. It was probably time for a whole new administration to come through. But that was one of the most painful circumstances of my life, because I never really dealt with somebody who was literally to my face dishonest, who would say that I had said things that I hadn't said, or accuse me of things that I absolutely had not done. I look back on it, and I'm glad it only happened to me once. I'm a little more wary about those toxic personality types. There are not very many of them, but you will find them buried into levels of particularly big corporations, where people who hide their incompetence, in this case, she probably was fabulous at other things, but in terms of this relationship, incompetence, and will project it on somebody else to get out of trouble. That was horrible.
Courtney?
Well, the only one I'd be willing to talk about happened about 50 years ago, and all the people are dead now, so I can talk about it. I worked at a radio station, and the radio station was bought out by a large publishing company, Doubleday. And so they sent in their own station manager, who came into our little radio station in San Antonio. And the first thing, this is a big corporate guy, the first thing he comes in, he tells the program director, okay, and he looked at the list of employees. He goes, well, there's a lot of part-time employees. There's no room for part-time employees at this corporation. Lay off, fire all the part-time employees. So the program director went, well, okay. He complied with the new station manager's wishes. And he didn't realize the new corporate guy didn't realize that 80% of the on-air staff was part-time, because They just did a 3-hour shift daily, or worked weekends or whatever. And so now he was faced with filling 24 hours of radio airtime with 3 people. And so the program director called us all up and told us we were fired, that all the on-air staff was basically fired. And then he had to go back to the corporate guy from Doubleday and say, okay, I laid off everybody. Now, will you be able to come in and fill those 22 hours that are going to be left open with dead air, unless we find some full-time people that are willing to work for a salary that only work 4 hours a day? We were all hired back the next day, so I think he learned from that very quickly, that radio is a different thing. You have to fill airtime, and you can't just make a blanket decision without carefully considering the fallout from that.
Right.
Who do you think you'd blame more for that particular process? The corporate guy, or the station manager who didn't fill the corporate guy in on what was about to happen when he did that?
Well, I think there was a lot of disdain for the corporate guy coming in. Well,
that I understand.
Manager.
Yeah.
And because of that, that's why the program director didn't, wanted him to learn from his mistake. And I think he knew that he had to go ahead and follow through with it, and then point out to him of his faux pas, so that it would stick to him a little bit better than trying to explain to him that, how are we going to fill the airtime?
Sometimes you can show them better than you can tell them. Next question.
Next question comes from Roscoe Jones in Bray, California. That might be a good lead into this. Bill talked about the product ending once the radio ad is over. How do we convince the client to build community with repeat production and starting a virtual channel to speak to their customers?
Bill, did you want to dive into that?
Yeah, I will. When I gave you that thing, that just was a moment of shifting in my thinking when the guy I was talking to at the radio station said, we excite these waves, they go out, and we hope that somebody's got a radio turned on. Probably they're driving around in their car. Hopefully they're on our channel. And when they're there, listening to that piece of advertising content eventually motivates behavior and whatever it is. That's really what the broadcast industry was built on. A little different now because broadcast isn't as ephemeral. Now you get things like, the backlog of all the office hours shows, where what we said that would have been ephemeral if this was just a broadcast going out is now captured for longer, and it can have some tail. But it is still true that selling intangibles, not a thing that people can hold, but a thing that is supposed to affect them and then changes or goes away or diminishes over time, is a different set of skills. When you're building virtual channels and you want to attract this audience, I think Alex has done this as well as I've ever seen it be done, in terms of you have to focus on providing value for the people when they tune in, so that they feel like they're getting something here that makes it worth coming back for day after day. If you can do that, and there's a lot of subtle little techniques and more overt techniques that he and we use every day to do that, the whole Q&A process of allowing others to run the show rather than us just talking about whatever we want to, all the subgroups, the office hours space thing and the music things that we do and all the rest of that also help form nucleuses of communities of people with like interests. We were very fortunate in that society was looking more inward in the pandemic when this started, so that we didn't have as many options to go out and fill our time with, outdoor events. And so a lot of us focused on this, and we found something we could build that was really valuable. At least I know a lot of us who are on the panel daily have found this very valuable, just in terms of increasing the number of people who are in our lives and that we can hear from. So all of those things have value. We're just, I think, beginning to learn, the industry, the whole globe is beginning to learn how to leverage that value by building programming that people want to come to, and the authenticity and the honesty of trying to make their lives even a tiny bit better by doing this kind of thing should, I believe, win in the end, if we can just keep learning incrementally how to do this more and more every day.
I found that just even from my time when I was at the state, this worked really well, is when you're able to show your client, if there are other people that are in the space that are doing something similar, to be able to play off of their ego a little bit of not wanting to be left behind. This is where research definitely comes into play. So building use cases or just an analysis, and especially a cost analysis, showing them when you create this one ad, that impact that ad will have, versus if you are doing something consistently over time, and the ability to garner, loyal listeners or building community. So those being just some of the ways of like really demonstrating the value add that it would be for them. Bill?
Yeah, I also left out, I should probably say there's a role also to metrics. One of the reasons that radio became what it did is because of Arbitron and the other things, allowing you to get a specific set of vetted data that says the advertisers who spent X got an increase in sales that was Y, and we can determine that if you double your spending, you will get X amount more, and if you spend less, there's a lot of variability to those rules, but having a metrics-based discussion possibility really helps with those intangibles. And so all the SEO, all the metrics you can get back from online, if you don't understand those, you're really playing a game that you're not playing very well. You must track and pay attention to the numbers involved in what you're doing.
Next question.
Next question comes up with Sarah Doyles in Falls Church, Virginia. How do you handle clients that want to expand their event scope but not their pockets?
Jason?
I'm more interested in hearing what Blue has to say than I do. I think he's way more qualified than I am for this. But I will remind people that your clients don't know what costs what. And if you can provide something for what you are charging, do it. This is what relationship building is. And, if not, say why not.
Blue?
Actually, Jason, I agree with everything that you just said. One of the things that is a downfall to not providing line items on a quote is when somebody wants to add a thing, they don't necessarily realize that it may not have been included in the original proposal. So generally speaking, what we tend to do is if a client comes to us and, no small children will be harmed, and, it's not going to cost us any more to actually provide the thing, and it's not something major. Those are a lot of different things that you kind of have to think about. But assuming that's the case, we usually just kind of look the other way. Now, when I say look the other way, that's not to say that we don't tell them this is something that would have cost more. But for this particular event, we're going to include it for you. Should it be something that you want to do in the future, there'll be a cost associated with that, and this is what that cost will be. If it's going to be something that will actually put us out of pocket, like let's say we need to bring in another camera operator, and that's a human that I have to pay a day rate to, then that gets passed on to the client. And quite simply, if they don't want to do it, that's totally fine. I have no, and I typically will say to them, I don't have a dog in this hunt, right? If you want an extra camera operator, this is our cost to bring them in, because we tend to make enough money on the initial proposal that if I need to charge them a camera operator at cost, then we're going to charge them a camera operator at cost. I'm not making any money on that. Maybe not the best way to do it, but that's how we tend to do it.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana says, how do you effectively communicate interesting builds interest, boring drives people away, with being quite so blunt to a client that loves the sound of their own voice?
That's always the challenge. And sometimes you just have to let them fall on their own sword, per se. Going back to what I shared in the last response of just putting the product out there and tracking the metrics to see how that works. And then, let's say it's a podcast, just throwing something out there. Then if the numbers are, say, low for month 1, 2, whatever that time span may be, then being able to come around and to, just share further with them there. And hopefully you have that leeway to do that. If not, if there's someone that is close to the client on their team, where you can maybe start planting some seeds with them to say, here are some thoughts. And we think, and when you're giving constructive feedback, that might be hard to hear. It's always great to show, well, here's what we feel like you will sound great at, and positioning it that way instead of just like your voice doesn't work. Just a way to soften the blow. Jason?
If you think if you are explaining something that you just said, you're losing. It's that simple. Be concise. You're not doing it well enough.
And Bill?
The only little thing I've ever done is if they're an expert at something, I sometimes gently and very carefully and very respectfully say, so could someone else do what you do? Just walk into it and do great without all the study and the years you've put behind that. If you're asking somebody who isn't a specialist in this thing to come in as an amateur and do as good a job as a professional, that kind of flies in the face of what you have spent all your career learning to do. So if you want to do your own voiceover, it might work fine, but I've got a bunch of people over here who spent 30 years becoming really good at this. And most people can't do that job as well without the 30 years behind them. Is it possible? Sure. And if you think it's more important that you be your brand, we're going to go wholeheartedly, and I'll bring coaches in, and I will work with you as much as I can to get you up to the level. But do keep your eye on whether or not you think this is the right way to go, because I've seen that happen where people are so enamored with seeing themselves on TV, they do horrible work and put it out in public, and I cringe every time I see it.
Well, there it is. We wrapped up another episode, another show. Office Hours producers, thank you so much for your fantastic questions. Of course, panel, we couldn't do this without you as well, offering your expertise and advice. If you want to find out what's happening for the rest of the week on Office Hours, visit officehours.global, and we will see you tomorrow or in after hours. Join us in after hours.
These are the credits. These people actually do stuff.
You've got a client that's boring. Show them Ferris Bueller's Day Off with Ben Stein doing his economics class preaching thing.
That's a really good idea. Is astronomical.
You made me want to go watch it now.